What's happening, ladies and gentlemen? Acronator here, and welcome to another week of Overwatch case studies. This week, I decided to do something a little bit different, mostly because the Overwatch League this past weekend, to be entirely honest, felt boring to me. I don't know. None of the matches stood out to me as like, oh wow, it's a really teachable moment or something I'd really want to analyze. It was just kind of like, eh? So anyways, I decided to cover a game that I found actually quite interesting. While it isn't tier 1, I find that it was a really good display of the difference between tier 2 and tier 3. Right, tier 2 being like contenders, some people consider like contenders trials tier 2, other people consider that like tier 2.5, right? And then like open division obviously being tier 3. And this particular game was the losers finals of the North American Open Division that happened as of recording this past weekend. Ironically, I actually was one of the people to cast this match, but the desktop audio, yeah, the desktop audio on my end is going to be muted, so we're not going to be hearing my cast or anything like that. But what I wanted to cover here is again like the difference between tier 2 and tier 3, because on the left-hand side of the screen here, it's kind of covered up by the YouTube video title, but it's a team called Nocturnal. They also went by Antiku. If anyone follows like the tier 2-ish scene from last November, that'd be November 2020, Antiku was a team that comprised almost entirely of this exact lineup, the only difference being the hit scan player, but everyone else is the exact same. And they, unfortunately, I think like their old hit scan player was cheating or something like that, and the management knew, and I don't think the players knew. Supposedly, there's a whole lot of like muddiness surrounding there, but like the players weren't particularly punished, but the hit scan was banned, and then like the organization had to like give up their spot in contenders trials. They had like gotten second place in open division, I think, and that like guarantees a spot into contenders trials. Either way. And then on the other side of things, Best Buds, a team that, if anyone follows like the tier 2, tier 3 scene, Best Buds had like this ridiculous open division bracket where they took down drifters from the upper bracket, sent them down to the lower bracket, because it's a double elimination tournament. And then when Best Buds got down to the lower bracket, they sent Shoes Money Crew home, which I believe actually won open division last time around, which would have been like 3 months ago, I think. I think they do it like 4 times a year, every quarter. Either way, ironically enough, as well as having casted this game, there's also a few amount of people from League Zero that I have been acquainted with in the past, like iZone, aka Pascal on Nocturnal. It's a ridiculously talented flex support player who actually was the Expert Division MVP. You have Sloth, who is the Season 0 MVP from League Zero. Red X, who ironically was on the same team as Sloth in Season 0. He's also a former staff member. He's been a manager. He's actually a 2-time champion, I think. Yeah, because he managed and substituted in the team that won Season 2 as well. So, like, a decent amount of League Zero veterans in this lobby. But in particular, again, I want to bring this back to the actual topic at hand, which is Nocturnal's very much like a tier 2 team. Right? Like everyone aside from the Hitscan Paolumu, I believe everyone had at least like middling to high level success in open division, in contenders over the past couple months since last November with Antiku. Like I'm pretty sure every single one of these players went on. Again, I'm not entirely sure about Paolumu, but I know like Pascal won contenders March, I want to say, with Revival, which was quite a while ago now. But either way, like, you know, anywhere from like decent amount of success to like making contenders to actually winning a month of contenders versus a team that basically, outside of like Red X managing an old contenders trials team known as No Evil, actually originally started in League Zero as well. But like outside of that, I don't think anyone on Best Buds particularly had too much experience at this level. So it was a really good distinct line between tier 3 on the right hand side of the screen in this case, at the top right, and tier 2 on the defense in this case. And the things I'm going to be wanting you to like pay attention to, we're just going to go over this one map. The things I want you to sort of pay attention to is how well Nocturnal punishes any kind of mistake from Best Buds, and also like how they force mistakes. They force their win conditions a lot better. Whereas Best Buds, mind you, this is losers final, so Best Buds, they do end up losing 3-0. But I mean, they get 3rd place. And considering the other team that actually won one open division was half American Tornado and half Dark Mode, you basically have two contenders teams and then Best Buds. So Best Buds is literally like the best tier 3 team from North America. Skip ahead here for a minute. Okay. So, one major thing to note is that throughout the entire series and throughout their entire run in Open Division, Nocturnal, also known as Antiku, kind of played like whatever they wanted to. It wasn't necessarily they were stuck on one particular composition. They just kind of played whatever. Whereas Best Buds, this exact composition was very much their bread and butter. Like, they were beating a lot of teams with just this. And it's a little bit unorthodox, although I think it fit very well into what their players were comfortable with. But by this point, it was very well known, especially because Best Buds had just come off of a match and immediately came into this one, as well as the fact that they had been playing it all tournament long, basically, at that point. So again, you have the close hold from Nocturnal. This Backstab Bud, by the way, is not actually the streamer Backstab Bud, although he is on the roster. I don't think he ever really played. This is another player called Caffeine, who is known as like not a Reaper one trick, I don't think, but like a Reaper main. Memes a lot about playing Reaper on Twitter. Either way, they just are playing on an account called Backstab Bud and also happen to be on Doomfist at this point in time, but generally speaking, as we saw at the very beginning, they like the Reaper. That being said, even though the series was a 3-0 in favor of Nocturnal, Best Buds did manage to like put up a decent amount of contention, right? Like, it wasn't super close. It's not like one of those games where it's like, oh, the scoreline doesn't tell. No, it very much was Nocturnal's game, but like Best Buds didn't just roll over and die. They didn't get first held every single time. Pretty consistently, they would get like a singular point or maybe even 2 points, just fall a little bit short, and then Nocturnal would push it that extra distance. I believe even the first map, just prior to this one, was Lijiang, and I think it went 2-1 for Nocturnal, so it was very close, but yeah. Unfortunately, the Observer didn't really catch the bulk of that fight, but I know for a fact there are fights, because this was the exact feed that I was seeing. When you cast in like a more professional setting, you're not actually in the game lobby yourself, you're just kind of given a live feed from the Observer directly. And I know for a fact I think it's after Best Buds take first point, or it might even be on their defense, but I think it's on their offense, where Best Buds take first point and then they struggle really hard to push across the bridge. And that's probably what I'm going to try and do for the thumbnail or something like that. But there's like one particular shot that I felt had a really good distinction between like tier 3 and tier 2, metaphorically speaking. Excuse me. So, obviously you have Paolumu about mid-death animation. Not particularly sure where he is, unfortunately. I think yeah, bitrate couldn't go much higher, unfortunately, so it's going to be a little bit pixelated if I try and stop it mid-fight. So the main differences between these compositions, they are both Brawl. Nocturnal seemed to like mirroring the Brawl against Best Buds, just because it was really difficult to try and run like a Shadow Dive or anything into them, just because they'd run on top of you and just annihilate you in an instance, because these are really good players. Like I said, they're not quite tier 2 level yet. I think if they grind it out for another season, they probably could. But that's neither here nor there. So like in terms of what these compositions want to do, the Nocturnal literally just wants to Maywall and then collapse. Whereas Best Buds honestly want Sloth to go in, create a little bit of chaos, and then the rest of the team gets on top of that target and just calls whatever. And generally Sloth was like the primary engagement tool. He would go in and like find a pick, find a lot of damage, find a pulse bomb, whatever. I guess Paolumu was like right on top of him. I didn't really catch that from the Observer feed. Unfortunately, they streamed at 1080p, and the bitrate requirements for that are very high, but they can only stream so high on the bitrate because they're streaming on Twitch as well. So you have Best Buds finding an early advantage, and they're trying to push it a little bit further, because obviously they already have first point, but they do want to secure the bridge, because the bridge is so incredibly difficult to push across, and this fight went really back and forth. But eventually, Let me rewind it just a little bit, right? So they just capture, but you have Nocturnal pushing all the way up to make sure that the cart doesn't get across the bridge for free. Red X gets a little bit caught out. Nice shatter comes in from the Reinhardt on Best Buds Tori Chise, but it doesn't really matter because there was no follow-up. Starfish, the Rhine on Nocturnal didn't really have to use their shatter. The focus fire was just better, right? Like you saw, I'll even go back again. You see Red X getting a little bit split from the rest of his team. Right, a little bit of a focus onto the tanks for Nocturnal. They do manage to demech Dusk, but losing Red X there is probably more valuable. Although it's not the end of the world because their spawn is right there, but they really wanted to get this across the bridge. Because like I said, it's so difficult. I have to look up if Paolumu has actually come from like a contenders team. I know he wasn't on the initial Antiku because that was a different player who's now banned, like I said, because they were hacking. but, but I wonder if like they are from another contenders. The name doesn't sound familiar to me, but like then again, a lot of these players are on alt, Starfish, Izone, Snail Gang. That I forget the name of that person, but that's Vega, that's Pascal, known contenders players. Yeah, they just have the shatter, and this is what I mean by like Nocturnal wanted to hold the bridge, and this is specifically why, because it's so awkward for Best Buds to then push into this. Normally, on Rialto defense, they would be on more of like a poke composition as opposed to this May McCree brawl, and they'd be up on the high ground and then just punishing any attempts to rotate past the bridge. But since they're on this brawl and they don't want to get off of it, this is pretty normal positioning, and there you have like the speed boost Paolumu into the front line basically. The Reaper, Caffeine can't exist behind enemy lines. And they're doing a great job of just like cleaning house. Like every time there's anyone who's out of position, Nocturnal are just collapsing hard. Like they lose their Baptiste, sure, but like it doesn't really matter when they're finding all these picks. I don't know what happened to Red X there. You can see that the attempt to do the Death Blossom was getting called in, and that's why Vega, aka Snail Gang, the Lucio Nocturnal, popped the beat, because they're like, no, you're not Death Blossoming here, because he was already using Wraith to get in. And that's what I mean by forcing mistakes out of these players, right? They understand not just their win conditions, but they understand Best Buds win conditions. They understand what their opponents want to do, and they're actively making it as awkward as possible for Best Buds to do anything. And that is honestly one of the biggest differences I've ever noticed whenever I've talked to acquaintances of mine through League Zero that have gone on to contenders like Pascal, Izone. The most I've probably heard from, the most like interesting takes I've heard is probably from Jishua, main tank formerly of Wisp. I think he's retired now. Infected as well. Anyone who's familiar with the Tier 3 scene knows him. Granted, he was only with League Zero for a brief period, but I have heard him talk a little bit about like how the compositions, how the comms work, although most of that knowledge has honestly come from Jishua. He's been very forthcoming about like his experience and like how it differs from like the community side of things, the quote tier 3, tier 4 side of things, right, versus the contender side. And it's honestly fascinating to hear like how they focus not so much on like the fundamentals, because at the tier 2 level, it seems that a lot of the fundamentals are just inherent. Like people and players at that level just know them, right? And a lot of people, quote unquote, know the fundamentals. Like I know the fundamentals, but I'm also like mid-plat at best, right? So like the difference is being able to execute that in game and having that be second knowledge, right? It just needs to become like muscle memory. And that comes through a shit ton of practice, a lot of discipline, and just a certain amount of skill that only tier 2 plus players have, right? And that's really the difference here. Like, it's not necessarily a difference in tempo, a difference in strategy or meta or composition. It's just Nocturnal, in a way, running circles around Best Buds. And that's not an insult to Best Buds. It's just Nocturnal have this innate understanding of the game that's at a higher level because they've competed with some of the best in the world. I mean, shit. Pretty much every single one of these players on Nocturnal, again, they've been in contenders over the past couple of months. I believe most of them now are starting to become retired. I know Pascal is for the most part. And their intent was to just kind of sell the contenders trial spot that they earned through this game. It didn't even show up to the grand finals. Everyone besides Dusk was asleep, quote unquote asleep. That's a whole different batch of drama in and of itself. But either way, like they've competed with some of these ridiculously talented players from Dark Mode, from American Tornado, most of which are, or half of which, are now on the Redbird Esports team that was in the grand finals and actually won the grand finals. They're going on, probably just going to climb right back up to the top level of contenders, if I'm being honest. You can see just how well Nocturnal dismantles Best Buds. Right, like just the discipline, I guess, of like they everyone just focus it. Like watch how fast Kai in this case gets melted. Right, the Kai tosses in the bomb doesn't quite work. Fight's going backwards. They decide they want to punish this disengage. Watch Kai's health right now. There you go. Went from half to nothing in like like 0.75 seconds flat, right? Like no time whatsoever. And they only lost their Mei, who already used the Blizzard. So like in terms of losses, Nocturnal gained a lot from that, like a net gain, a significant amount from that punish. And this is what I mean by like normally trying to punish the rotation across the bridge. Kai just didn't have enough defense matrix to get across. I'm not sure what Sloth was trying to do here with the High Noon, but I think oh right, they wanted to touch, get the overtime. But Nocturnal were fine with giving up that little bit of percentage. They didn't even bother contesting point. I think Paolumu is just up on the high ground. I can't quite see him from this perspective. Not that it matters. They just stopped the cart there. And like I said when I was casting this, that's not particularly far on Rialto. You know what I mean? Like it's somewhat common to be held on second point Rialto, but generally it's going to be a little bit further along, right? It's going to be a lot closer to that second point, not like right there at the bridge. So like once Best Buds, spoiler alert, granted I already said this, but Nocturnal win 3-0, so obviously they push it that far. Once Best Buds lose first point, they have significantly less space to work with, and the pressure is actually quite on because the spawn distance to get to the final checkpoints in this case, which is about halfway to second point, it's about even between the attackers and the defenders, and that's why you see more common holds closer to the end of second point, because the defender's advantage starts to become more prevalent, and it's more common, a little bit easier to hold there. Most notably at this point, Best Buds, despite playing for the first time like this series, and I think I said this, I know I said it on stream, I think it was during Hollywood, their final map, the one after this, but I know I'd said it prior to the stream to kind of catch up my fellow caster, the play-by-play, Seymour, who wasn't quite as familiar with a lot of these players, and I was like following a lot of these teams in the final rounds because I had known for like a week or so that I was casting this game. So I'd known like Best Buds, they were capable and they're like skilled in regards to open division, but like in terms of, you know, this caliber of opponent, if they were forced off their composition, meaning like the Tracer, Reaper, Moira, Lucio, and then these two tanks, they looked a lot less good, right? Still serviceable, like they never quite roll over and die, but it looks a lot less comfortable, right? I think they only ever scrimmed on the one composition because honestly, if there weren't contenders, quote-unquote Smurfs, in open division, Best Buds probably could have secured a spot in the trials, which is a little bit tragic, but just circumstances of the time. I suppose who would have guessed that American Tornado would have disbanded as an organization, leaving the players to go back down to open division and climb their way back up this season, right? That's what I mean is when I say like if Best Buds really wanted to grind it out 3 months from now and the next open division happens, they could probably make trials, you know, with like 3 months of extra prepping and planning, not like non-stop, because you're going to have 2 months of contenders after this going into September and October, and then the next, or right? Yeah, I think the next open division happens in November, I want to say. Unless I'm mistaken, they don't have that many. Anyways, I'm going to go back there. The camera didn't really catch it too much, but you have a few members of Best Buds up on the high ground, about 3 of them. So Nocturnal know that they want, I think it's like the Reaper, the Baptiste, and the Diva? I don't know, we'll see in a second. But they know that there's at least 3 members up onto the high ground from Best Buds, and Nocturnal want them off the high ground so that they can rotate and just push the cart more cleanly. So they all rotate, everyone's all together. You have a little bit of a poke right there. Beautiful Maywall. Okay, yeah, so it's the Reaper, the Rhine, and I think the Baptiste or the Diva. Someone else is up there. No, maybe it's just those 2. Oh, you know what it is? I think the Baptiste was up there, but he didn't get Maywalled. Either way, the Maywall completely cuts off everyone. Honestly, I didn't even think that they were going for a Maywall when they went up there. Normally, teams just push people off, but then again, Mei isn't extremely common here. Usually, you'll see like the Farah, the Echo, maybe like a Hanzo or a Sombra on occasion. So it's just like not a common hero pick. Either way, the Maywall was sadistic, and I love everything about it. But it's just like one of those things where it's like, of course, a contenders level Mei would think of that. That's their job. Literally, in some cases, that's the legitimate semi-pro level. When you're looking at like the resources coming into this fight, Nocturnal are just like a little bit ahead in terms of ult economy. They know how to zone everyone off. They made it awkward for the backline of Best Buds, who were behind the Mei wall there. Orion didn't manage to keep Sloth alive. And then you just have the push. I mean, Biz is like literally behind most of Best Buds that remain because it's just not being pressured. And, you know, now you have 4 minutes and 40 seconds just about to push it not very far. Like, you have 2 major areas that are going to be difficult to push through, right? The bridge, which they just got over because they got a really clean fight. And then, so on the left side of the screen, they're doing exactly what you have seen in comp games. It doesn't work as well as you might think. Or maybe it works exactly as you think. I'm not quite sure what you're thinking right now, but either way, it was being scouted out, and Best Buds are just kind of like, what the hell are these guys doing? Because they stand there and stare at it for a minute. Unfortunately, none of the tanks on Nocturnal were with them, so this was getting a little bit cheeky. At this point, they were memeing around a little bit, Nocturnal. They do bring it back, and they bring it back to like a serious level in a minute. But they tried to I guess, C9 or just like get something out of it. It might have actually worked. I think Biz didn't quite have the Blizzard, or if he didn't want to invest it into a Diva who's just staring straight at him. Either way, Best Buds hold. Biz staggers himself really hard. Granted, they have the time, so okay. Like, you're good, but you're not that good. Like, even an out level Mei wouldn't win that 1v6, literally. That, you know, so that's just Nocturnal being a little bit cheeky. They invested a lot of ultimates, to be fair, into that fight. They invested 4 because they had the Shatter, they had the Bomb, they had the Beat, try and keep everyone alive. Biz very late used the Blizzard, but at the very least, they did get, I think it was 3 ultimates out of Best Buds as well, because Kai had to use the Bomb to remech, Sloth used the Blizzard in response to Biz, and then Red X used the Beat in response to Snail Gang, aka Vega. However, I would say that probably Best Buds has the better options here because they still have the window, they're going to have the Shatter, whereas Starfish doesn't really. I don't think Starfish really had an opportunity to because he was trying to push the cart, so he didn't really get the chance to swing into people. And another like smaller thing that's just kind of like a symptom of having tier 2 players, like when you look at how fast they're rotating and how close together they are for the most part, not counting that last engagement, right? Like, the pressure is really heavily on, especially the front line of Best Buds here. And I think it really just displays a really strong difference between these calibers of players, right? Like, again, you have legitimate contenders players who've made it very far versus a bunch of tier 3 players who, you know, might have experience managing or coaching or whatever at this level, but they've never, as far as I know, none of them had ever gotten to this point. Maybe Caffeine has? I don't know. I'd have to look. I'd have to look him up. I think he's more so known for just being like that Reaper guy on ladder, but he might have had like a contender's past or something. Certainly comfortable enough on the hero. But either way, yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to display here. I thought it was a really interesting case study, and that's literally the entire purpose of this series, is to pick out something interesting and be like, oh, hey, here, look at this specific thing. And in this case, I think especially because tier 3, the divide between tier 3 and tier 2 is so nebulous at times, and it's kind of rare that you get to see these teams compete against each other outside of like contenders trials, which again only happens like once every 3 months. So that gets a little bit awkward at times, especially because like contenders trials, from my experience of watching it, has been like generally have like, the bottom tier contenders teams that just can't win a game or win very few games, and contenders go down to trials and just like dominate everything, and then just go straight back up to contenders. And occasionally you'll have like an up and coming OD team that might be headed up by a few old contenders players or something like that, or maybe just a trials team that's consistently bounced back and forth from OD to trials and eventually gets their shot. But generally, like I said, trials isn't as often, and this was the best example on hand, especially from this past weekend. It's relevant, it's topical, dare I say. So anyways, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this look into the divide between Tier 2 and Tier 3 Overwatch. Really fascinating. I was really happy to be able to cast this game, not just because there were League Zero alumni in there, but because I found it really interesting to see everything on display, like a legit Tier 2 team versus a legit Tier 3 team. Anyways, that's all I've got for this week. Tune in next Wednesday for some kind of analysis. I don't know, I'll probably do something. do something. Anyways, that's all I've got. So until next week, don't die.